the long-awaited new series has finally arrived, and every frame of it is said to be a visual spectacle. The show is set during the Second Age of Tolkien's Middle-earth, continuing to unfold the legendary tales of its heroes. The characters are diverse elves, dwarves, orcs, wizards, and humans, each challenging their own place in the world. In a world teetering on the brink of catastrophe, they struggle to find their purpose. The orcs are given a familial backstory, and both the special effects and plot are outstanding. The Dark Lord Sauron rises again, and his destructive power is about to awaken once more. His black blood seeps underground, eventually consuming a mole. To sustain its existence, no life survives beneath the surface, and the creature slowly climbs upward through cracks in the rock. It crawls across the snowy ground, eventually struggling to reach a mountain path. It waits for its next prey, and soon, a horse-drawn cart passes by. The horse senses something sinister beneath its hooves and bolts, leaving its human passengers behind. The human is consumed by the black blood, transforming into a handsome humanoid figure. He gives himself a new name, Halbrand. At the same time, the orc tribe is slaughtering humans en masse. Sauron joins a group of refugees fleeing toward the coast. During a nighttime voyage, a massive shadow moves beneath the water, heading toward their ship. Sauron is the first to sense the danger, realizing the ship is likely about to be attacked by a giant sea creature. Chaos erupts on the ship, and an old man is pinned under the wreckage. Sauron doesn't save him but instead steals the royal crest of the Southlands from his chest. When the ship is completely destroyed, Sauron sinks underwater. There, he sees the giant sea monster heading straight for him. As the creature opens its mouth to devour Sauron, it suddenly turns and retreats in fear. Even sea monsters recognize the power of the Dark Lord. The large ship is reduced to a makeshift raft, with a few survivors clinging to floating debris. It is then that Sauron encounters a beautiful woman, Galadriel. And so, the two central figures, one light and one dark, cross paths in an extraordinary way. Sauron uses the crest to successfully impersonate the king of the Southlands. Meanwhile, the orc army engages the humans of the Southlands in battle. Under Adar's leadership, the orc army is defeated, but the Southlands are plunged into darkness. The orcs continue to capture the remaining humans in the region. Sauron is among these survivors. They are given two choices. The first is to swear allegiance to Adar, receive a trident mark, and become slaves. The second is to resist and refuse to submit. Though the outcome is predictable, the survivors either die or are gravely injured, but that's not the main point. The focus shifts to Sauron, who stands before Adar as a prisoner. In Adar's eyes, Sauron is the descendant of the Southland royal family. In Sauron's eyes, Adar is merely a backstabbing enemy. It turns out that after Morgoth's defeat, two of his generals remained, Sauron and Adar. As Morgoth's most powerful lieutenant, Sauron naturally became the new leader of the orcs. Adar pledges his loyalty and is about to crown Sauron as king, but at the last moment, he turns the crown into a weapon and stabs the unsuspecting Sauron. The orcs swarm him, tearing out his organs piece by piece. Sauron's blood soaks the stone beneath him. This time, however, Sauron chooses not to seek immediate revenge against Adar. He tells Adar about an ancient sorcerer guiding the elves to forge a new weapon of metaphysical power. Once completed, the orcs will be enslaved by it. Sauron offers a deal: release the Southland people, and he will reveal the sorcerer's location. What Adar doesn't know is that the sorcerer Sauron speaks of is himself. At this moment, Adar hesitated, afraid that Sauron might truly return for revenge. He knew that the sorcerer Halbrand spoke of was none other than Sauron. Thus, he imprisoned Halbrand. That night, an old man came with a large bone, trying to bribe him for information about Sauron's whereabouts. However, Halbrand didn't play along, which angered the old man, who beat him up. After the old man left, Sauron picked up the bone, and a wild beast appeared before him. He offered the bone to the beast. With Sauron's incantation, the beast instantly turned into a loyal dog. A new plan began to take shape. Meanwhile, the light of the elves was fading, leaving only one golden leaf remaining. If the elves abandoned Middle-earth now, it would spell doom not only for their people but for all races. At this critical moment, the dwarves unearthed Mithril, and a new power was forged. That power was the 3 elven rings. However, Galadriel discovered a new secret. It turned out that the elven rings had been forged by Celebrimbor and Halbrand, the so-called king of the Southlands. She also realized that Halbrand was the Sauron she had been relentlessly searching for. Upon learning the truth, Galadriel sought an audience with the High King. who demanded to know Halbrand's true identity. He suspected that Sauron might have tampered with the three rings. The High King declared that they had to take the risk, as only the three rings could save the elven race. He ordered Elrond to hand over the rings, but Elrond turned and jumped into the waterfall. Seeing this, the High King immediately sent people to search for her and to deliver a message to Celebrimbor. He wanted to warn him that Halbrand was Sauron. Elsewhere, a mysterious amnesiac woman fell from the sky and was discovered by Nori, a Harfoot girl. This figure was neither human nor elf but a unique being. After surviving numerous dangers, Nori learned that the Meteor Man was actually a wizard, but he had lost 80% of his memory. To fully recover, they decided to travel to Run in the east. However, along the way, they got lost, and with no supplies left, they were on the verge of fainting from hunger. At this point, Nori eyed a tree next to the wizard and asked him to use magic to create food. With a few incantations, the wizard conjured roasted skewers. The next day, they met their friend Poppy, who brought along Sadoc's old book. With the book's guidance, Nori and the wizard finally found their way to Run. Meanwhile, after jumping off the waterfall, Elrond sought refuge with an elder named Círdan. He wanted Círdan to destroy the three rings, but he hesitated. If the rings were destroyed, it would mean abandoning not just their people but all of Middle-earth. Yet the light of Erendil was fading, and the elves needed to return home or be consumed by darkness. Amidst the heavy hearts of all, Círdan returned with the three rings. The elder wore the red ring of fire, Galadriel donned the white ring of water, and the High King took the blue ring of air. When all three rings came together, a miracle occurred. The Tree of Life was restored to health, and the sacred light illuminated the land once more. The elves no longer had to leave their home. Elsewhere, Adar realized Halbrand would not compromise and agreed to his terms, but only if Halbrand would kneel and swear allegiance to the Lord of Mordor. Sauron was finally released, and a larger conspiracy began to unfold. Meanwhile, an amnesiac old man walked through the desert with two girls. One of them asked, "Do you need to rest?" But before he could reply, he fainted. They hadn't had water for 3 days, and if they didn't find any soon, they would all die. With no other choice, the two girls dragged him in search of water. Finally, they found a well. One of them quickly checked the well to confirm it held water. After ensuring it was safe, she hurried to draw water and save the old man. The old man was the stranger from the Lord of the Rings, though he had yet to recover his 6 staves. After drinking the water, he quickly regained his strength. At that moment, he was drawn to a staff lying on the ground. When he picked it up, he felt as if he had seen it before in a dream. Suddenly, 5 masked assassins appeared, each wearing a bizarre mask. The old man said, "We're just here to drink water." The masked figures ignored him and drew their swords to attack. Arrows flew as the two girls ran for cover, leaving the old man standing there alone. The old man raised the staff and began chanting, summoning a fierce wind. The gale turned into a massive tornado, sweeping across the land like a serpent of sand. The 5 masked figures were instantly swallowed by the storm, but the stranger, still unable to fully control his powers, found himself trapped in the whirlwind along with the two girls. Even the staff in his hand began to shatter. The girls, barely holding on, shouted for help, begging the old man to save them, but the stranger struggled to move and couldn't reach them in time. Before he could grab their hands, the two girls were swept away by the raging wind. The scene shifts to a massive rock collapsing a bridge in the Dwarven Kingdom. At that moment, the Dwarven Kingdom was suffering from violent earthquakes. Prince Durin and Princess Dissa sensed something was wrong. Not only were the dwarves' mines destroyed, but the entrances and exits to the entire city were also blocked. Even their crops began to wither, and the dwarves blamed everything on Prince Durin. Rumors spread that he had allowed the elves into the mines, bringing a curse upon them. Princess Dissa urged them to stop spreading rumors, saying that gossip is like a singing bird, pleasant from afar but empty up close. However, after the minister's analysis, they discovered it was a chain reaction caused by a recent volcanic eruption. Dissa decided to use an ancient ritual to reconnect with the sacred spirit of the rocks. But the ritual failed, leaving the dwarves feeling abandoned by the earth itself. Meanwhile, the elven rings had revived the sacred tree, averting the immediate crisis. But the question remained, had Sauron tampered with the 3 rings? According to reports, Sauron was last seen near Mordor. The High King believed this was their chance. This time, he was determined to eliminate both Adar and Sauron, but Galadriel warned that while Sauron may have been there, he might no longer be in the same place. Galadriel had a reason for her suspicion ever since she put on the Ring of Water. She felt a mysterious connection to Sauron. The person she encountered was none other than Celebrimbor, the master forger. She was puzzled as to why Celebrimbor had come uninvited. Suddenly, the sky turned dark. She saw Celebrimbor nailed to a tree, and Galadriel couldn't believe her eyes. In truth, this was a hallucination caused by wearing the ring, convincing her that Sauron was seeking Celebrimbor. Galadriel suspected Sauron wanted Celebrimbor to help forge the remaining magical swords. She urged the High King to let her search for Sauron. As it turned out, Galadriel's hunch was correct. Sauron had already arrived at the Elven Forge city. However, due to Galadriel's previous warning, Celebrimbor didn't let Sauron enter. Sauron, however, deliberately revealed scars from his past torture to Celebrimbor's maidservant. Unbeknownst to Celebrimbor, the messenger carrying the High King's letter had already been killed by Sauron. The maid informed Celebrimbor about Sauron's injuries, but he remained firm and refused to let Sauron in. Meanwhile, Galadriel sought out Elrond, asking him to accompany her to Eregion, but Elrond refused, arguing that if Galadriel had been deceived by Sauron once, it could happen again. He accused her of becoming Sauron's ally the moment she donned the Ring of Water. As the story unfolded, Sauron's schemes gradually came to light. An elder wearing the Ring of Fire dipped his hand into water, and the fish swarmed toward him as if under his control. It turned out the rings could dominate all living things, bending their thoughts and will to the wearer. The evil power of the rings terrified Elrond, prompting him to seek the counsel of the elven elder Círdan. Círdan advised him not to let fear cloud his judgment. He reminded Elrond that those who bore the three rings were allies, not enemies. With Círdan's guidance, Elrond made up his mind. He agreed to lead a small team with Galadriel to Eregion. The scene shifted to a stormy night in Eregion, with dark clouds gathering overhead. Sauron persistently waited outside for Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor, unwilling to see him drenched in rain, ordered his guards to drive him away, but Sauron seized the moment to talk about the three rings. As a master craftsman, Celebrimbor couldn't resist his curiosity about such exceptional creations. Sauron misled Celebrimbor, claiming the elves had abandoned the rings without acknowledging his contributions. Celebrimbor, unaware the messenger had been killed, wondered whether the rings had truly helped the elves. Thus, Celebrimbor took the bait and invited Sauron into his home. Upon learning that the rings had indeed benefited the elves, Celebrimbor felt proud and delighted, but Sauron subtly sowed doubt, saying, "You forged the three rings to save the elves, yet humans and dwarves face the same crises. Soon, all kingdoms will fall, and only the rings of power can lead them back to light. This is our shared mission." Before Celebrimbor could fully process his words, Sauron had vanished. When he reappeared, he emerged from the forge, transformed into Arnata, the elven emissary. Sauron skillfully manipulated Celebrimbor into forging additional rings. However, forging the rings of power required mithril. Celebrimbor sent a letter inviting Prince Durin and Princess Dissa to the Forge City. He explained the immense potential of the rings, hoping they could help the dwarves overcome their hardships. After some deliberation, the couple decided who would speak with the king. The dwarven kingdom was already in dire straits, with enough food to last only 3 months. Durin reluctantly informed his father of everything he had learned at the Forge City. To save his people, the king agreed to the plan. The scene shifted back to the Forge City, where Celebrimbor was working on the remaining rings of power. As molten gold poured into the forge, the dwarven king presented a piece of mithril. Celebrimbor was about to place it into the forge when Sauron reached out his hand. He handed the mithril to Sauron. Sauron made a peculiar gesture, then closed his eyes and began chanting. The mithril melted into the fiery forge as Celebrimbor and Sauron exchanged knowing smiles. From this moment, the dwarves would also become tools in Sauron's conquest of the world. Not long ago, a group of orcs targeted an old horse. One of them muttered, "Don't be scared, we won't eat you." The orc threw a rope with precision, catching the horse, but they were quickly proven wrong. One orc drew his knife, only to be kicked to death by the horse. Another orc was dragged down, and the horse charged forward, smashing him into a tree stump, a gruesome end. The remaining 2 orcs were too terrified to follow because ahead lay the dark forest, from which nothing ever returned alive. The old horse continued to run, as if searching for something it had lost. It came upon a mine and walked inside. The ground was littered with countless skeletons. The horse seemed to be looking for something. At that moment, a man appeared beside its owner. The old horse licked away the webs covering the man. Suddenly, a sticky substance dripped from above. The man looked up, wondering what it could be. There was so much of it. The horse neighed in alarm. It was a spider's lair. The man quickly grabbed a weapon from a nearby orc, but just as he armed himself, the orcs suddenly came to life. Their fight woke the Spider King. The man was no match for the orc and was repeatedly beaten. Spotting the Spider King behind him, he shoved the orc toward it. The Spider King leaped onto the orc, crushing its head. Seizing the moment, the man retrieved his scimitar. In the nick of time, he struck with one swift slash. The Spider King recoiled in pain. Retreating, the cave fell eerily silent. The man stayed alert, ready for another attack. Suddenly, the Spider King lunged at him from behind, pinning him to the ground. Pinned down, the man managed to grab its fangs. Just as he was about to become its prey, he grabbed the scimitar and stabbed the Spider King. The pain caused the Spider King to screech and retreat. The man took the chance to climb onto his horse and escape. The Spider King gave chase, unwilling to let its prey escape, but it dared not leave its lair in broad daylight. The man was Isildur, a soldier of the Numenorian expedition. After escaping the cave, Isildur wandered alone on horseback. After some time, Isildur encountered a girl named Eregion. The two traveled together until they came across an injured old man. Kind-hearted Isildur offered him some food, but suddenly, several men jumped out of a nearby wagon. The two were quickly subdued. As the old man prepared to finish off Isildur, an arrow pierced his arm. More arrows followed, and a dark-skinned elf emerged from the woods, swiftly defeating the enemies. The remaining bandits fled on horseback. One bandit without a horse didn't get far before being shot dead. The one who saved them was Eregion. Isildur thanked him and introduced himself. Isildur wanted to enter the forest to retrieve his horse, but Eregion stopped him. He warned that the bandits' numbers were likely tenfold inside the forest, and entering would mean certain death. Thus, the two followed Eregion back to his village. Unfortunately, Erendur's lover had been killed by orcs, and the villagers were holding a funeral for her. Later, Theo treated Isildur's wounds. The next day, Theo told Isildur he had a way to find the horse. The two snuck into the depths of the forest under the cover of night. As Theo had said, the bandits were camped there. Isildur untied the horse's rope, but things didn't go as planned. The horse's loud whinny alerted the bandits. As they approached to investigate, Theo stepped out. He distracted them by asking for a light, but the bandits captured him. At that moment, an axe flew in from a distance. Theo took the chance to run, but the bandit leader, realizing an ambush, warned his men to stay alert. Theo ran desperately toward the forest's edge. When he turned back, he heard the bandits screaming. Not knowing what was attacking them, Theo turned to flee, but he was blocked by a massive creature. Theo was ultimately captured. Hearing his screams, Isildur turned back to rescue him. The scene shifted to the Numenorian kingdom. They had suffered a crushing defeat in their war against the orcs. The Numenorian expeditionary force was nearly wiped out, and the people blamed Regent Queen Nimloth. Meanwhile, after the old king's death, Pharazôn sought alliances with influential ministers. On the day of the coronation, the people protested, calling the queen a liar unfit to rule. Isildur's sister was the first to stand against her. Believing her brother to be dead, she blamed Nimloth entirely. She revealed the old king's elven artifact to the public, accusing Nimloth of being influenced by it. She claimed it was the artifact that led Nimloth to launch the expedition, resulting in countless warriors dying in vain. She believed someone like that was unfit to be queen, and the scene immediately descended into chaos. Just then, a clear bird cry came from the horizon, followed by the appearance of a giant eagle on the ceremonial platform. The Numenorians regarded the eagle as their totem. Nimloth's cousin, Pharazôn, seized the opportunity to step onto the platform. He had coveted the throne for a long time, and the crowd began chanting Pharazôn's name, believing the eagle had chosen him as the next king. Meanwhile, an unexpected visitor arrived at Mordor under Adar's rule. It was a mountain troll from the Grey Mountains, joining the orc army to help Adar defeat Sauron. The orc army gathered in massive numbers, ready to besiege the land. The great battle of Middle-earth was imminent. To prepare for the war, several orcs hitched themselves to a broken cart and pulled it into the camp. When the cart arrived, the orcs surrounded it but seemed hesitant to approach, as though something dangerous was inside. Finally, a guard summoned the courage to lift the tarp, revealing a blonde woman inside. The orcs jeered at Galadriel, mocking her. The guard opened the cage, causing everyone to step back in fear. Without hesitation, Galadriel leaped out. A guard stepped forward, grabbed her, and was about to kill her. At the last second, Adar stopped the guard. Seizing the opportunity, Galadriel removed her hairpin and took control of Adar, but Adar spoke strange and cryptic words. Elsewhere, Elrond and Galadriel's group of elves encountered a band of wights. Back in the elven kingdom, the wights were reduced to ashes. Having defeated the wights, they continued their journey to the forged city of Eregion. On the way, the elves encountered the orc army, thinking it was preparing to attack the Forge City. To relay the news to the High King, Galadriel volunteered to hold off the orc army alone so her companions could escape safely. However, she was captured and taken alive. Back in the Elven Kingdom, Elrond informed the High King of the situation and requested reinforcements for Eregion, but the High King refused, mistakenly believing the orc army was still under Sauron's command. He was unaware that Sauron had become an enemy of the orc leader, Adar. Meanwhile, the 7 dwarven rings were successfully forged by Sauron and Celebrimbor. King Khazad-dûm picked up one of the rings, debating whether to wear it. Ultimately, he succumbed to the allure of the ring's power. The downfall of the dwarven kingdom had begun. The king then went to the dwarven mines and began digging at the foundation walls without hesitation. His son, Durin, tried to stop him but was harshly reprimanded. Surprisingly, the king broke through, allowing sunlight to flood in. It turned out the ring had guided him, enabling him to identify the spots to dig. The dwarves managed to let sunlight illuminate the mines, heralding a new dawn. The dwarves cheered, hailing King Khazad-dûm, but the crown princess remained uneasy. Khazad-dûm boasted of his success to the other dwarven kings, claiming it was thanks to the Ring of Power. He persuaded the other 6 kingdoms to wear their rings as well. Thus, the 7 dwarven kingdoms also fell under Sauron's influence. Meanwhile, Sauron stirred further trouble, asking Celebrimbor to forge the 9 rings for men. Celebrimbor was thrilled by the success of the dwarven rings but refused to forge rings for men, citing their susceptibility to corruption. Left with no choice, Sauron began forging the rings himself, but an accident occurred during the process. Celebrimbor's maidservant had been helping Sauron. When questioned, she revealed that it was due to Balrogs. At that moment, Prince Durin arrived, urgently requesting to speak about the rings. Durin explained that his father had grown increasingly greedy since wearing the ring. Becoming a different person, he suspected there was something wrong with the ring, but Celebrimbor dismissed the claim angrily. Durin then suggested that perhaps the problem lay with the forger. This made Celebrimbor recall Sauron's guise as Anatar. Sauron, meanwhile, was devising his next move to deceive Celebrimbor into forging the 9 rings for men. Elsewhere, after ascending to power, Pharazôn began reshaping Numenor into his vision of a human kingdom. Anyone loyal to the Regent Queen, including Admiral Elendil, was removed from their posts. To his surprise, his own daughter led the opposition. Although stripped of his title, Elendil retained the soldiers' respect. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor confronted Anatar with Durin's concerns, but Anatar turned the accusation around. He warned Celebrimbor to be wary of being manipulated himself. Anatar claimed that the forging of the rings was not just a matter of craftsmanship but of spiritual connection. Despite Anatar's previous deception, Celebrimbor remained confused. Anatar reminded him that the High King had approved the forging of the elven rings, but the dwarven rings had been forged through deception. He urged Celebrimbor to confess the truth to the High King. However, Celebrimbor couldn't let the High King find out, fearing it would end his ability to forge anything ever again. Sauron's manipulation succeeded once more. Celebrimbor declared to his followers that they needed to complete the forging of all the rings of power to correct past mistakes. He convinced them that forging the 9 rings for men would bring balance to the world. With this rationale, everyone began preparing to forge the rings for men. Thus, the first step in Dark Lord Sauron's plan to dominate the world was about to be completed. Meanwhile, the dwarven crown princess discovered an earth-shattering secret. Beneath their lagoon lay an unknown creature. The woman fell into the water, and suddenly, a giant sea monster swam toward her. It seemed she was about to become its prey, but the monster, after taking one look at her, didn't eat her. Instead, it opened its massive jaws and let out a deafening roar. The villagers on the shore thought she had been eaten, but a surge of water erupted onto the shore. This was the monster's judgment. The villagers were shocked, because the woman was their queen, and the monster had spared her. It meant she had passed the trial. She was now destined to become the queen of the sea. However, the dissatisfied King Pharazôn used an elven artifact to glimpse Numenor's future. There, he saw visions of Balrogs and Sauron, realizing that Halbrand was none other than the Dark Lord Sauron. At the same time, the Dwarven King used the remaining 6 dwarven rings to trade with the other dwarf kingdoms for immense wealth. Piles of gold filled the palace, but Prince Durin and his wife believed the king had become a different person since wearing the Ring of Power. If they didn't act, the entire dwarven kingdom would be doomed. So, she sang to summon bats to disrupt the mining operations. Elsewhere, Galadriel captured the orc leader Adar and was brought inside his quarters. Adar believed they shared a common enemy in Sauron and proposed an alliance with Galadriel to destroy him. He presented Morgoth's crown, suggesting Galadriel use its power and the 3 elven rings to annihilate Sauron. But Galadriel told Adar to wait, as Elrond was leading the elven forces to Eregion. Once they reached the city, Elrond would seal it off and rescue Celebrimbor from Sauron. Afterward, they could join forces to destroy Sauron completely. However, Galadriel insisted that any ring tainted by Sauron's essence must be destroyed. Adar worried that the High King might use the victory to launch an attack on the orc stronghold. To prevent this, Adar decided to preemptively attack Eregion before the elven reinforcements arrived. In the orc camp, tension rose as preparations for a massive battle in Middle-earth began. Seeing the countless orcs below, Galadriel suspected this might be one of Sauron's schemes. She believed Adar's forces were insufficient and that an attack would play into Sauron's hands. She warned Adar that Sauron lacked an army and intended to use the orc horde to assault the elves and defeat them. But Adar remained resolute and sounded the war horn, beginning an unprecedented battle. Inside Eregion, news of the orc assault spread quickly, throwing the city into chaos. People fled in panic, and Celebrimbor heard the warning alarms. He tried to open the window to see but was stopped by Sauron. Sauron insisted that Celebrimbor's priority was to focus on forging the 9 rings for men. Sauron tried to prevent him from leaving, but Celebrimbor pushed past him and stepped outside. However, upon stepping out, Celebrimbor found himself trapped in one of Sauron's illusions. Seeing his people safe, Celebrimbor breathed a sigh of relief. Sauron then emerged holding a forging hammer. He handed Celebrimbor a bag of mithril powder, claiming it was the purest ore. With it, the 9 rings for men would surely succeed. He also gave Celebrimbor the hammer to continue forging the rings. Believing him, Celebrimbor returned to work on the 9 rings, but as soon as he stepped back inside, the illusion faded, and reality returned. Eregion was in chaos, with people fleeing in all directions. Sauron watched the approaching orc army, knowing his carefully laid plans were finally unfolding. Adar's orc horde had prepared for battle, and the Rings of Power reached a new climax. Adar led his forces in an epic clash with the elves. The forged city was engulfed in flames and explosions, as countless orcs fearlessly charged the walls. Giant trolls joined the assault, further tipping the scales. The city fell into an inferno of fire and destruction, with explosions consuming everything. Adar's eyes burned with hatred toward Sauron for deceiving his soldiers. The city's lord failed to issue counterattack orders, mistakenly believing the moat would protect them. Adar had already ordered his troops to redirect their siege engines. They planned to dam the river with debris from the mountains, filling it and enabling a ground assault. The forged city's soldiers braced for the ground attack as Sauron vowed to lead the charge against the orcs. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor, still trapped in Sauron's illusion, continued forging the 9 rings. As he worked, a ruby fell from his forging hammer. When he bent down to retrieve it, he noticed a mouse scurrying past. Looking in the mirror, he saw his face becoming hollow and lifeless. Realizing he was in a looped illusion, Celebrimbor marked a candle as a test. Meanwhile, Prince Durin and Princess Dissa occupied the mines to halt the king's excavations. The old king, Khazad-dûm, ordered their removal, prioritizing wealth over all else. But the soldiers refused, choosing to side with Durin against the king. The king had already fallen under the ring's control. At this time, Elrond approached Durin, requesting dwarven aid to defend the forged city from the orc onslaught. With deafening war drums, the orc army launched their ground assault. Without the moat's protection, waves of orcs surged toward the city walls. Elven warriors fired arrows non-stop, but the orcs, armed with siege weapons, pressed forward undeterred. Despite the elves' skill, the orc army's sheer numbers began to overwhelm them. Seeing the orcs nearing the walls, elven soldiers started to fall. Sauron rushed to the city's keep, asking Celebrimbor if the 9 rings were complete. He pointed to the mouse on the ground and told Sauron not to disturb it. Then he took out the marked candle and asked Sauron why it had burned all day without melting. At this point, Sauron dropped the pretense and ordered him to finish forging the 9 rings. Angry, Celebrimbor picked up a forging hammer and threw it at Sauron, shattering the glass behind him. At that moment, the wailing outside the city reached his ears, prompting Celebrimbor to rush out and check. What he saw was devastating. The forged city was engulfed in flames. Grieving, Celebrimbor returned inside, only to find the forge had been struck by a catapult and reduced to ruins. Even the materials he was using to craft the rings had turned into a strange black liquid. As he puzzled over what it was, Sauron raised his hand, revealing the black liquid to be his blood. It dawned on him that the man before him was none other than the Dark Lord Sauron. Panicking, he ran to the city walls to tell his maidservant, but she refused to believe his claims. At that moment, Sauron appeared before them. Celebrimbor immediately ordered the soldiers to seize him, insisting that Sauron's blood was black. However, when Sauron raised his hand to reveal his wounds, the blood had turned red. The maidservant comforted Celebrimbor, telling him to rest. Seizing the opportunity, Sauron pushed her off the wall. The orcs below immediately swarmed her, killing her, leaving Celebrimbor distraught and alone. Just then, the elven army's war horns sounded as thousands of mounted elven soldiers charged toward the Forge City. The orcs, in the midst of their siege, stopped to reorganize their defensive formation. Despite the looming elven cavalry, the orcs stood their ground without fear. As the two sides drew closer, the orcs wheeled out a cage. Inside was Galadriel. Adar planned to use her as leverage to force the elves into surrender. A sharp spear was pressed against Galadriel's throat, forcing Elrond to order a ceasefire and enter negotiations. Adar claimed Sauron was their common enemy and that the elves of the Forge City had been deceived by him. He demanded the elves hand over their rings to defeat Sauron, but Elrond suspected it was a trap and refused to exchange the rings for Galadriel's life. An epic battle was now inevitable. Elrond's confidence stemmed from his belief that his old friend Durin would bring reinforcements the next day. As Elrond left the orc army, a group of orcs secretly followed him, intending to ambush him and ensure he never returned. The battle soon erupted. In the chaos, an orc killed Elrond's horse. Furious, Elrond attacked the orc, only to have his face slashed. Overcome with rage, Elrond swiftly killed the orc. Meanwhile, the orcs had breached the city walls, engaging the defenders in fierce combat. At the same time, the orcs below were using siege engines to break through the walls, trying to create an opening. Despite the defenders' reports of the wall's resilience, Adar refused to retreat. He was determined to capture the Forge City because he believed Sauron was hiding inside. When Adar returned to the prison to use Galadriel as leverage, he found the cell empty. It turned out that during a kiss, Elrond had secretly slipped her a metal hook. Disguised in orc attire, Galadriel escaped into the forest and encountered the arriving black-skinned elf. The black elf invited her to join the fight to save Eregion. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor, still shackled, continued forging the rings of power for Sauron. When Sauron left, Celebrimbor threw the 9 rings into a furnace, attempting to destroy them, only to retrieve them moments later. Desperate to escape, Celebrimbor cut off his own finger, freeing himself from the shackles. Exhausted, he was knocked down by a catapult's impact. When he awoke, he was surrounded by soldiers. As they prepared to take him back to the city keep, Galadriel suddenly appeared and stopped them. She had slipped into the city through the dwarves' ancient tunnels. Celebrimbor entrusted her with the 9 rings and stayed behind to face Sauron. Meanwhile, Durin overthrew his father's rule and prepared to lead his forces to Eregion, but another incident occurred. The old king had killed a guard with an axe and escaped to the mines, seemingly intending to release the demons below. Durin's wife urged him to return, leaving Durin torn. If he left with his army to aid Elrond, his father, Khazad-dûm, might be lost to him forever. Back at the Forge City, the walls were on the verge of collapse. Elrond and his men fought their way to the walls, instructing the archers to use flaming swords to destroy the siege engines. However, the archers were shot by orc arrows. One female archer, though injured, lit her flaming sword and aimed it at the orcs' barrels of gunpowder. Her arrow struck true, and the explosion obliterated the surrounding orcs. Though she heroically perished, the battle raged on. The Black Elf arrived with the remaining elves. Realizing the tide was turning, Adar ordered the release of his secret weapon. On the walls, the Black Elf observed the orcs making way for something massive. A colossal troll emerged from the forest. Seeing this, the Black Elf immediately ordered an attack on the troll. The troll moved like a monstrous beast, kicking soldiers aside like they were toys and crushing them underfoot with ease. It advanced toward the walls, unstoppable, destroying anything in its path. Even as arrows rained down, it used soldiers as shields to block the attacks. With the situation growing increasingly dire, Elrond charged toward the siege engines alone. Arondir shouted loudly, successfully drawing the troll's attention. The troll turned its focus to Elrond, who was desperately trying to sabotage the siege engines. The troll punched Elrond, sending him flying, but the blow severed the engine's ropes. The siege engine recoiled violently, smashing into the troll. The troll roared in pain but managed to stand again, grabbing the siege engine and using brute force to ram it into the walls. With the walls taking heavy damage, the situation seemed hopeless. At the critical moment, the Elven King arrived with his cavalry, wounding the troll again. The black elf leaped off the walls and tackled the troll to the ground. He drove his sword into the troll, pinning it to the earth. Elrond arrived and struck the troll with a decisive blow, as dawn broke on the horizon, delivering the final strike. As the troll took its last breath, the orc army sounded their horns, launching another assault. The orcs grabbed their weapons and charged forward once more. Under Adar's command, they unleashed their final and most ferocious attack. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor and a few soldiers cornered Sauron, but they didn't expect him to use magic to control the guards. The soldiers began turning on one another, killing each other in the chaos. Even the guard captain, who tried to stop them, was killed with a swift slash to the throat. As dawn broke on the horizon, Elrond anxiously awaited reinforcements from his dwarven ally, Durin, but the dwarves had yet to arrive, and the elven forces were dwindling. With the orc army closing in, they had no choice but to fight alone. The two sides clashed in a brutal final battle. The black elf attempted to take down Adar, thinking victory could be achieved by cutting off the head of the army, but Adar overpowered him in just a few moves. At the same time, the city walls were about to be breached. The forged city was on the brink of falling, with no chance of salvation. I'm a movie enthusiast. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.